Good. Whoa. Yikes. 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 This is actually a terrible idea. Good morning. Just bear with me for 1 second. And I hope I move that when I leave. Morning, folks. How is everyone today? Pretty good. Exciting day. Exciting day. Okay. Well, I'm excited to welcome all of you to the 42nd Annual Baird English Symposium. Here at KO, we have a long and unique tradition connecting 4 decades of students, teachers, readers, and writers. And I hope that you'll share in this gratitude as we get ready to welcome our symposium author in just a few moments. But first, a couple of words. Although I've been at KO since 2018, I'm never not surprised by the incredibly accomplished and talented authors whose names grace the beautiful prints, created, of course, by our talented visual arts program, in the Severance hallways. From E.L. Doctorow, our original symposium author in 1984, to countless Pulitzer Prize-winning novelists, including, but not limited to, Elizabeth Strout, John Updike, and Colson Whitehead, poet laureates and Pulitzer Prize winners Tracy K. Smith and Gwendolyn Brooks, to Tony Award-winning playwrights like Tony Kushner, Arthur Miller, and Sarah Ruhl, and to countless National Book Award winners and finalists and New York Times bestsellers Minjin.
Raising a tornado, an alligator wrestling theme park, or a society desperate for donations of sleep and dreams, Russell's stories ask us to reimagine what's possible and challenge us to see the world through a lens of curiosity and creativity. Karen Russell's mastery of diction, imagery, and plot sequencing makes readers travel through a new, bending, and twisting universe with each sentence they read. Each paragraph, a vivid mosaic of Russell's unfiltered imagination and love for the human experience. Russell's published works have been nothing short of outstanding, consisting of 3 short story collections, a novella, and a novel, all fusing magical elements with the real world to encapsulate themes of adulthood, family, morality, and everything in between. Her 2011 novel, Swamplandia, was a finalist for the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and was named one of the best books of the year by the New York Times. Russell's other works include her 2014 novella, Sleep Donation, which was re-released in 2020, and her upcoming second novel, The Antidote, set to release in the spring of 2025. Her works have been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Best American Short Stories series, and many more.
Additionally, she has authored 3 short story collections: St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, New York Times bestseller Vampires in the Lemon Grove, and most recently, Orange World. Born and raised in Miami, Florida, and now living in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 children, Russell earned her bachelor's degree in Spanish from Northeastern University and her master's in fine arts from Columbia University. A champion in education, Russell has taught as a professor of creative writing at the University of California, Irvine, Williams College, Columbia University, and Bryn Mawr College, and was endowed chair of creative writing in the MFA program at Texas State University. As our 2 senior sections of the symposium class can attest, there was never a dull moment in the classroom. Mr. Biondi's classroom is filled with little Russell-inspired trinkets, such as an inflatable pool alligator, prop seagulls, and whale versus krill t-shirts that drape the walls. Karen Russell truly brought her magic into the classroom, and it was a pleasure to unpack each character's story, from the comedic Dugbert Shackleton to the deeply conflicting emotions of Kiwi Bigtree. Throughout the upper school, each English class is connected with Russell's work, but we also have the pleasure of teaching middle school classes. Julia and I have taught 3 classes for each form in our middle school, leading activities such as a March Madness themed tournament of competing story seeds. Students were inspired by Russell and her specialty in magical realism, crafting all sorts of story concepts, from popsicles plotting to take over the world to hot dogs taking revenge on the 4th of July. To Karen Russell, thank you for inspiring our community and taking the time to be with us today. Without further ado, Please join us in welcoming Kingswood Oxford's 2024 Symposium author, Karen Russell.
Thank you so much, Joella and Julia. Thank you, Billy. Thank you all for having me. It's genuinely such a pleasure to be here. I really can't believe it. And I was telling some of your wonderful teachers that I wonder, this is probably true for all of you. Maybe you all feel like you're still 5 and 9 and 11. I genuinely most days still feel like an awkward 14-year-old. Like that is a persistent part of my living experience. And I have been like blessed to do, a lot of visits at different schools. I think getting to be with people at the threshold that you're on, it's a special gift. It's a special gift because I, was telling some of your teachers, you're so wide alive and wide awake right now, and to really have, this ability to live at the top of your intelligence. Adults in midlife, which I have somehow to my own bewilderment become, we get sleepy, we have mortgages, we're sort of complicit with a lot of everyday violence. And I think you're all very free in a different way right now, free to see and know and feel things that adults become sort of insulated from. And it's genuinely moving to talk to you, because I can tell you I'm having all kinds of like visceral flashbacks to being a high school freshman, senior, middle school also. And, I do write sort of wild stuff in proportion to how wild it feels. I think I often write about kind of younger protagonists, and I don't mean to, project onto you or speak for you, but my memory of that period was it did feel indeed like a supernatural metamorphosis. I mean, a lot is changing very rapidly. And there are ways, too, where young people are so smart, so sensitive, and yet don't always have the same agency that adults do in creating and maintaining this world. But you will, right? We're just borrowing the future from you. And the stories we tell about who we are really matter. So that's my grandiose preamble. But I really am just grateful to know a little bit more about the program, too. So happy that first visit went well and that it resulted in almost half a century of visits. Honestly, agog when I look at the other people who have come to be with you and be the symposium author, that I get to have that privilege and pleasure. I had just the best time meeting with the seniors and hearing a little bit about your own writing process, and I hope, to learn more. My favorite part of these is always the Q&A, so I'm going to read a little bit and chat a little bit, and then I'd love to take your questions. This is one of the first stories I ever wrote. I hope it's okay to read it. It just felt like appropriate. I think some of you are familiar with it. I will say, too, in my lifetime, I've never been part of a program where students are teaching students my work, and I find that, incredible. And I thank you for sharing your gifts in that way. It's a really special way to know a story, right? To teach it, and then to also get echoes back and see it inspiring other stories. I think that's the reason many writers wanted to write in the first place, right? Was to give other people raw materials to dream with and to make a self with. And I heard Robin Wall Kimmerer say recently that an educated person is someone who knows what their gifts are and how to give them to the world. And I can tell that KO is the kind of place where that is the education, right? That it's so much about helping students identify what is best and wildest and most idiosyncratic and most alive in them, what their passions are, and giving them wings and helping them to fly. It's a gift to be at a place like this. I think I didn't tell my teachers enough when I was in high school what they were changing for me. Come back, right? Thank your teachers now, and then come back and let them know that you are fledged here and that you got to soar, because it's such a labor of love. I can tell you, again, from the vantage of midlife. And yeah, you might not know quite yet, I was such a nerd and yet really invested in defensive camouflage. I was not about to risk social death by saying that I loved 100 Years of Solitude or Antigone. But this seems like a place where you can take that risk. And I think it's lucky and wonderful to be candid about your passions and to get that support. So another nice thing about like being quietly a 14-year-old in disguise, but also in my 40s, is you can just sort of share freely. Like I think I've hit that point in my life where you probably have some older people in your life who do this, where you're just sort of a font of life advice. So this is St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves. And I wrote this story when I was a graduate student, and I was in my very early 20s. And it just had like, I just wrote it like the way a child writes. I was like, what would happen if the daughters of werewolves were re-educated by nuns? And I didn't really have anything else beyond this what if, right? And I think if a story works at all, it leads you to other questions and other concerns. But initially I was like, I'm just gonna write a hilarious story about the daughters of werewolves. And this is it. And I won't be able to finish the whole thing, so I might just jump around a little bit. And I also won't be able to howl in the baritone of a wolf. So you'll just have to supply that amazing gravelly sound. St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves. The initial period is one in which everything is new, exciting, and interesting for your students. It is fun for your students to explore their new environment, from the Jesuit Handbook on Lycanthropic Culture Shock. At first, our pack was all hair and snarl and floor-thumping joy. We forgot the barked cautions of our mothers and fathers, all the promises we'd made to be civilized and ladylike, couth and kempt. We tore through the austere rooms, overturning dresser drawers, pawing through the neat piles of the stage 3 girls' starched underwear, smashing light bulbs with our bare fists. The windowless bunk was odorless, and we remedied this by spraying exuberant yellow streams all over the walls. We jumped from bunk to bunk, spraying. We nosed each other midair, our bodies buckling in kinetic laughter. The nuns watched us from the corner of the bedroom, their tiny faces pinched with displeasure. Ay caramba, said Sister Maria de la Guardia, que barbaridad, and she made the sign of the cross. Sister Maria came to St. Lucy's from a halfway home in Copacabana. In Copacabana, the girls are fat and languid and eat pink slivers of guava right out of your hand. Even at stage 1, their pelts are silky, sun-bleached to near invisibility. Our pack was hairy and sinewy and mostly brunette. We had terrible posture. We went knuckling along the wooden floor on the callous pads of our fists, bearing row after row of tiny wood-rotted teeth. Sister Josephine sucked in her breath. She removed a yellow wheel of floss from under her robes and looped it like a miniature lasso. The girls at our facility are backwoods, Sister Josephine whispered to Sister Maria de la Guardia with a beatific smile. You must be patient with them. I clamped down on her ankle, straining to close my jaws around the woolly extra large sock. Sister Josephine tasted like sweat and freckles. She smelled easy to kill. We'd arrived at St. Lucy's that morning, part of a pack 15 strong, and we were accompanied by a mousy, nervous-smelling social worker, the baby-faced deacon, Bartholomew, the blue wolfhound, and 4 burly woodsmen. The deacon handed out some stale cupcakes and said a quick prayer. Then he led us through the woods. We ran past the wild apiary, past the felled oaks, until we could see the white steeple of St. Lucy's rising out of the forest. We stopped short at the edge of a muddy lake. Then the deacon took our brothers. Bartholomew helped him to herd the boys up the ramp of a small ferry. We girls ran along the shore, tearing at our new jumpers in a plaid agitation. Our brothers stood on the deck, looking small and confused. Our mothers and fathers were werewolves. They lived an outsider's existence in caves at the edge of the forest, threatened by frost and pitchforks. They had been ostracized by the local farmers for eating their fruit pies and terrorizing the heifers. They had ostracized the local wolves by having sometimes thumbs and regrets, and human children. Our pack grew up in a green purgatory. We couldn't keep up with the purebred wolves, but we never stopped crawling. We spoke a slab-tongued pidgin in the cave, inflected with frequent howls. Our parents wanted something better for us. They wanted us to get braces, to use towels, to be fully bilingual. When the nuns showed up, our parents couldn't refuse their offer. The nuns, they said, would make us naturalized citizens of human society, and we would go to St. Lucy's to study a better culture. We didn't know at the time that our parents were sending us away for good, and neither did they. That first afternoon, the nuns gave us free rein of the grounds. Everything was new and exciting and interesting. A low granite wall surrounded St. Lucy's, the blue woods humming for miles behind it. There was a stone fountain full of delectable birds. There was a statue of St. Lucy. Her marble skin was colder than our mother's nose. Her pupilless eyes rolled heavenward. Doomed squirrels gamboled around her stony toes. Our diminished pack threw back our heads in a celebratory howl, an exultant and terrible noise, even without a chorus of wolf brothers in the background. There were holes everywhere. Isn't it good that I don't try to do that howl in real time? That's a good decision. We supplemented these holes by digging some of our own, and we interred sticks in our itchy new jumpers and the bones of the friendly, unfortunate squirrels. Our noses ached beneath an invisible assault. Everything was smudged with a human odor. Baking bread, petrol, the nun's faint woman smell sweating out beneath a dark perfume of tallow and incense. We smelled one another too, with the same astonished fascination, because our scent had become foreign in this strange place. We had just sprawled out in the sun for an afternoon nap, yawning into the warm dirt, when the nuns reappeared. They conferred in the shadow of the juniper tree, whispering and pointing, and then they started towards us. The oldest sister had spent the past hour twitching in her sleep, dreaming of fatty and infirm elk. The pack used to dream the same dreams back then, as naturally as we drank the same water and slept on the same red scree. When our oldest sister saw the nuns approaching, she instinctively bristled. It was an improvised bristle, given her new human limitations. She took clumps of her scraggly nut-brown hair and held it straight out from her head. I have a 5-year-old daughter now, and she does exactly that when she's really mad. It's interesting impulse. Sister Maria gave her a brave smile. "And what is your name?" she asked. Oh, the oldest sister howled something awful and inarticulable, a distillate of hurt and panic, half-forgotten hunts and eclipsed moons. Sister Maria nodded and scribbled on a yellow legal pad, and then she slapped on a name tag. "Hello, my name is Jeanette it is." The rest of the pack ran in a loose, uncertain circle, torn between our instinct to help her and our new fear. We sensed some subtler danger afoot, written in a language we didn't yet understand. Our littlest sister had the quickest reflexes. She used her hands to flatten her ears to the side of her head. She backed toward the far corner of the garden, snarling in the most menacing register that an 8-year-old wolf girl can muster. Then she ran. It took them 2 hours to pin her down and tag her. "Hello, my name is Mirabella." "Stage 1, Sister Maria sighed, taking careful aim with her tranquilizer dart. "It can be a little overstimulating." "Stage 2. After a time, your students realize that they must work to adjust to the new culture. This work may be stressful, and students may experience a strong sense of dislocation. They may miss certain foods. They may spend a lot of time daydreaming during this period. Many students feel isolated, irritated, bewildered, depressed, or generally uncomfortable. Those were the days when we dreamed of rivers and meat. The full moon nights were the worst. Worse than cold toilet seats and boiled tomatoes, worse than trying to will our tongues to curl around our false new names, and we would snarl at each other for no reason. I remember how disorienting it was to look down and see 2 square-toed shoes instead of my own 4 feet. "Keep your mouth shut," I repeated during our walking drills, staring straight ahead. "Keep your shoes on your feet. Mouth shut, Shoes on feet. Do not chew on your new penny loafers. Do not. I stumbled around in a daze, my mouth black with shoe polish. The whole pack was irritated, bewildered, depressed, uncomfortable, and between languages. We had never wanted to run away so badly in our lives, but who did we have to run back to? Only the curled black grimace of the mother, only the father holding his tawny head between his paws. Could we betray our parents by going back to them after they'd given us the choicest part of the woodchuck, loved us at our hairless worst, nosed us across the ice floes, and abandoned us at St. Lucy's for our own betterment? Physically, we were all easily capable of clearing the low stone walls. Sister Josephine lifted the wooden gates wide open. They unslatted the windows at night so that long fingers of moonlight beckoned us from the woods. But we knew we couldn't return to the woods, not until we were civilized, not if we didn't want to break the mother's heart. It all felt like a sly human taunt. It was impossible to make the blank, chilly bedroom feel like our home. In the beginning, we drank gallons of bathwater as part of a collaborative effort to mark our territory. We puddled up the yellow carpet of old newspapers, and later, when we returned to the bedroom, we were dismayed to find that all trace of the packed musk had vanished. Someone was coming in and erasing us. We sprayed and sprayed every morning, and every night we returned to the same ammonia eradication. We couldn't make our scent stick here. It made us feel invisible. Eventually, we gave up. Still, the pack seemed to be adjusting on the same timetable. The advanced girls could already alternate between two speeds, slouch and amble. Almost everybody was fully bipedal, almost. The pack was worried about Mirabella. Mirabella would rip foamy chunks out of the church pews and replace them with ham bones and girl dander. She loved to roam the grounds, wagging her invisible tail. We all had a hard time giving that up. When we got excited, we would fall to the ground and start pumping our backsides. Back in those days, we could pump at wolfy velocities. Que horror, Sister Maria frowned, looking more than a little jealous. We'd give her scolding pinches. Mirabella, we hissed. No. Mirabella cocked her ears at us, hurt and confused. Still, some things remain the same. The main commandment of wolf life is know your place. That translated perfectly. Being around other humans had awakened a slavish dog affection in us, an abasing, belly to the ground desire to please. As soon as we realized that someone higher up in the food chain was watching us, we wanted only to be pleasing in their sight. Mouth shut, I repeated, shoes on feet. If my sister had this instinct, the nuns could not figure out how to activate it. She'd go bounding around, gleefully spraying on their gilded statue of St. Lucy, mad scratching at all the fleas that survived their powders and baths. At Sister Maria's tearful insistence, she'd stand upright for roll call, her knobby, oddly muscled legs quivering from the effort, and then she'd collapse right back to the ground with an ecstatic oomph. She was still loping around on all fours, which the nuns had taught us to see looked unnatural and ridiculous. We were so ashamed that we used to locomote like that. Her fists were blue-white from the strain, as if she were holding a secret tight to the ground. Sister Maria de la Guardia would sigh every time she saw her. She'd sit down with Mirabella and pry her fingers apart. You see, she'd say softly again and again, what are you holding on to? Nothing, little one, nothing. Then she would sing out the standard chorus, why can't you be more like your sister Jeanette? I'm going to jump just to kind of end somewhere that feels like an ending. So if you haven't read this story, there are these linear stages, and the idea is like you're going to be this fully naturalized citizen of human society by the end of this re-education. And it's more of a Mobius strip of progress and loss. Stage 5. Let me see. At this point, your students are able to interact effectively in the new cultural environment, and they find it easy to move between the two cultures. One Sunday, near the end of my time at St. Lucy's, the sisters gave me a special pass to go visit the parents. The woodsman had to accompany me. I couldn't remember how to find the way back on my own. I wore my best dress, and I brought along some prosciutto and dill pickles in a picnic basket. We crunched through the fall leaves in silence, and every step made me sadder. "I'll wait out here," the woodsman said, leaning on a blue elm and lighting a cigarette. The cave looked so much smaller than I remembered, and I had to duck my head to enter. Everybody was eating when I walked in. They all looked up from the bull moose at the same time. My aunts, my uncles, my slow-eyed, lolling cousins, my parents. My uncle dropped a thigh bone from his mouth. My littlest brother, a cross-eyed wolf boy who has since been successfully rehabilitated and now is a dour, balding children's book author, started whining in terror. My mother recoiled from me as if I were a stranger. Turr? It should sound like much more impressive than that, obviously. She sniffed me for a long moment. Then she sank her teeth into my ankle, looking proud and sad. After all the tail wagging and perfunctory barking had died down, the parents sat back on their hind legs. They stared up at me expectantly, panting in the cool, gray envelope of the cave, waiting for some display of what I had learned. "So," I said, telling my first human lie, "I'm home." Thank you. Thank you, guys. I love reading from that story. I found out recently that I think it's part of like the curriculum for many ninth graders in New York State. And that made me so happy because it was written when I was a young person, and it's really a story for young people, I think. And, I want to make sure we have time for questions, too. I'm just checking, Billy. This ends at 11:30? No. Just keep an eye on the time. Okay. So I'm going to read just a little bit more, and then I'll ad-lib, and I'll take some questions. But, I get asked this frequently from my own relatives. They're like, "Why do you write that crazy stuff?" They're always giving me more like commercially lucrative ideas. My dad just today was like, "You should write a love story set during a time of war on a boat." And I was like, "That does sound like a blockbuster, Dad. I'll file that away." I mean, I think, and you're all probably discovering this too. You sort of are the writer that you are. And it's okay. I think I used to be maybe even embarrassed a little bit as a younger writer of my own inclinations and just this desire to try anyway, to be funny, to have these sort of fantastic conceits. For me, I wouldn't be able to write straight historical fiction, for example. There's something paralyzing to me about that lighting. And I feel like when I can make some alteration that lets me into a story, when I have permission to imagine something that gives me the authority inside that world, it really opens up the possibility of honesty. So that's one thing to think about, maybe like what story can only I write? And I firmly believe that for each of you, there's a poem or a song or a story. Only you can hear it and only you can write it. And it might be in a register that feels closer to consensus reality, or it might be on Mars, right? But whatever, you're always in the business of telling a true story. So sometimes I feel like I will change something in the service of emotional realism, right? So if I'm writing about the daughters of werewolves, right, that's letting me think and feel through what it is to sort of straddle generations or straddle cultures, and the confusion of that, right? And the loneliness of that, of trying to perform to a standard that might not be your own, right? The pain of being born into a contest that you did not design. And I think other writers would write about it in a school, right? It would be a more straight, realist account. For me, having access to these other registers, I think it does really let me get at the strangeness of being alive and certain kinds of joys and pains, it's just a different palette to try to tell a true story. So as a kid growing up in Miami, I lived in the closet of my mind trying on costumes. Later, I'd go to college and read textbooks in which academics tried to shove the universe into various corsets. But as a kid, I wasn't reading for that kind of knowledge. I just wanted to wear new skins. I wanted scales and wings. And I'd figured out that you could do these really bizarre tricks in the library in full view of the librarians. You could, for example, metamorphose. You could suture a character's wings to your 9-year-old body. You could drop time like a skirt and step outside its wrinkled orbit. In the span of 1 hour on any rainy, ordinary Wednesday, you could live several lifetimes, commune with the dead, kill a man without remorse in the Western Territories, run off with traveling carnivals, fall in and out and in of love, fall down a rabbit hole in your backyard and land in another galaxy. This was always happening to British kids in the YA novels I liked. I think those Brits need better zoning laws. I dutifully checked out Bronte novels, and I loved them, too. But inside my desk, I had a stash of fairy tales and science fiction, Ray Bradbury, Octavia Butler, Madeleine L'Engle, some people that you have read, right? Borges, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Frank Herbert. The skins I got to wear when reading these books were thick hibernation whites, electronic carapaces, marten plumage, whole-body carnival tattoos. The straitjackets of nightmares. These skins were great traveling clothes. All of my favorite voyages as a young reader occurred inside them. In the Miami-Dade Public Library system, if a book was identified as horror or fantasy or sci-fi, it was quarantined behind the beanbag chairs and labeled with a sticker of a cross-eyed dragon. And this gave my mother pause. You know, I think the dragon was really a disservice to young readers because my mom was like, I don't know about this. You should go to the classics section, which I did. And I found some amazing books there too. Anna Karenina, The Great Gatsby, but also Dune and Cujo. And I started to sort of question some of these generic divisions, you know? Because if you've read Jane Eyre, you know that there's a ghost, you know, like right in the beginning. It's like a terrifying, haunted opening. You know, and if you've read, you know, Peter S. Beagle's The Last Unicorn, you know that this is a prose stylist genuinely on par, you know, with some of our finest poets. So I would say, too, it's good to read like an omnivore. And it's good sometimes to read outside your comfort zone. How many people here love poetry? Yeah. When I was in high school, I'll tell you a secret. I didn't think I loved poetry at all. Because I felt poetry made me feel like a fool. I felt like I was missing something key, you know, and I was reading it like it was some riddle to be solved instead of, permission to live in mystery. I was reading it because I had the anxiety of like a kid who was very focused on GPA. I wanted to get the answer right, and it was uncomfortable for me to sort of encounter poems that tell truth so elliptically and open up a space for truths that can't be expressed in a linear way. They can't be paraphrased out. And there isn't some right answer, you know? There's your experience of the poem. And one of my favorite teachers did for us, he read us The Idea of Order at Key West by Wallace Stevens, a gorgeous poem, but I remember listening to it with this panic, like, oh my God, he's gonna ask us what it's about or what it means. And I couldn't even hear it, right? I was like in the din of my own insecurity. And he said, at the end, this is all he said. He didn't ask us any questions. He said, this is one of my favorite poems. And I have no idea what it means. Not really, right? It works on me in a way that's irreducibly mysterious, even to me, and that's part of its power. So, I mean, shifting away from like the anxiety of kind of performing brilliance in your writing or in your reading into that openness, into that space where you sort of have permission to be bewildered. I love writing about children and young adults because I think as a reader and as a writer too, we give young people permission to be bewildered by a reality. It's like no less mystifying, I can assure you, you know, at 43. But there's sort of, this is the grace, I think, that we give to child narrators, young narrators, that this lucid bewilderment. You know, this ability to ask these questions that, are ongoing. So when I took my first creative writing class, I wrote many stillborn stories. I will say, too, I didn't get to take one until college, so I love that you guys are getting to exercise your wings now, right? And sort of make work in response to the work you're reading. I tried to write about stuff that seemed adult to me, and so I would write about, like, adultery, even though I was, like a single 18-year-old woman. Or I would write about, I don't know, like a dinner party scene that was so fraught and like really nothing happened. People were like, pass the salt, she said menacingly. Like it was just a very terrible, very bad. But it was what I thought adult literature was. And there were no dragons. So I had loved these books where I got to wear rabbit fur or like watch, Dr. Frankenstein, regard a monster of his own creation and lightning. But now I was like just trying to like wear sensible pumps and write, serious things. I tried to portray the real world, to whip married adults into plausible dramas, to describe the makes and models of their cars. And these stories felt like a stiff, self-conscious ventriloquy of reality. My Raymond Carver wannabes were boring and grim, and a betrayal of my actual emotional experience of this world. Flat cola stories, I came to think of them. I was trying so hard to get the facts right that these stories lacked any effervescent sense of creation, discovery, something bubbling under the surface. Then a favorite professor of mine told me that I could write like the authors I loved, like Marquez, George Saunders, Kelly Link, Octavia Butler, Calvino. World-class, Kafka also, I bet some of you have read The Metamorphosis. World-class literary stylists whose sentences sing, whose characters have integrity and complexity, especially when they are young children or ghosts or dinosaurs. Here were writers of serious literature drawing upon the oniric power of fairy tales and fables, borrowing the technique of uncanny estrangement from horror and science fiction, handing monsters the mic and letting them crack jokes. I was awed by their ability to demolish the real world of a Midwestern Tuesday and rearrange the rubble into something glowing and new. Out of the dynamited materials of the everyday, these authors had engineered impossible architectures, escalators to the underworld, moon ladders. They extended my notion of what books could be and do, and they gave me permission to write at twilight, at midnight, on islands, in stranger seasons. I saw that these sort of genre-bending tales were not kid stuff, not at all. They had the extraordinary power to draw out the deep strangeness of what we too often dismiss as the everyday. In Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein writes, the aspects of things that are most important for us are often hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity. One is unable to notice something because it is always before one's eyes. So none of this is meant to be a knock on realist fiction, if such a thing exists, because turning a seed packet of words into a world inside a reader's mind is an eerie accomplishment, whether that setting is Detroit or a moon colony. And I just want to conclude with this for those of you who are trying to write your stories now. In her essay, Writing Short Stories, Flannery O'Connor says, fiction is an art that calls for the strictest attention to the real. And that is true whether the writer is writing a naturalistic story or a fantasy. I mean, we are always beginning with what is or what has an eminent possibility of truth about it. And even when one writes a fantasy, reality is the basis of it. I would even go so far to say, and some of us were talking about this in the senior seminar, for the person writing a fantasy, writing something weird, writing something really out there, you have to be even more strictly attentive to the concrete detail than someone writing in a naturalistic vein, someone writing closer to consensus reality. Because the greater the story's strain on credulity, the more convincing the properties in it have to be. And that's the challenge, no matter what kind of fiction you're writing, to convince the reader through the art of detail that the story you are telling is a true one. So there's this imperative, right, to make a world that feels plausible, even though you're doing it out of just words on paper, to make it feel credible, to make it feel like a rule-governed, consistent world of consequence. And that is a tough job. And then there's this other spookier job, which is like to make a stranger care about these imaginary people, in this imaginary place that you're scoring this dream. In other words, no matter how whacked out or strange or funny or fill in the blank your story turns out to be, no reader can live in that world for long unless it also feels solid enough to support a genuine emotional connection. I'm going to stop there so we have time for questions, guys. And you can ask anything. Thank you. Almost anything. I know it's terrible to ask the first question, but I'm genuinely like the least intimidating person to ask a question to. Yeah.
So, as a class, we were reading Vampires in the Lemon Grove. We noticed that a trend in your stories, in that you always leave the end of the story up for the reader to interpret, like what's gonna happen or what it means. Why do you do that?
Oh, I know. It's very infuriating to some people. Yeah. Tell me your name.
Alex.
Alex, yeah, it really is. And I was telling a story last night. My grandfather, I was so proud when my first story was published, and I sent him a link to the New Yorker. I was like, he didn't believe, I think, that I had a job, and I can't blame him, right? Like, taking dictation from imaginary people doesn't seem like a job. And I was like, look at this font. This font is going to impress you, Grandpa. And he called me on the phone, and he said, they're so smart because you have to buy the magazine to find out how it ends. And I was like, no, Papa. And then he said, finish the expletive deleted story. So I'm just saying it is frustrating, I think, to some people. I love an open-ended story in particular. And it's really hard to engineer an ending that feels satisfying but open. Do you know what I mean? Where it feels like not infinitely open. And there's a quote by Grace Paley I love where she says, I want to give my characters the gift of an open destiny. So sometimes I think about it as almost a haunting insofar as like whatever's haunting me, whatever question remains, I want to give to the reader. In this story I just read, this little sister disappears, right? You don't really know what happens to her. That's something that will haunt the characters inside the story for the rest of their days, and I wanted it to haunt the reader too. If I said, right, like Mirabella was found dead under the tree, it would be a lesser story, I think. Yeah. Because part of the bigger question inside it is sort of like, how does this happen to us? How do we go from being part of this collective to being individuals who are so focused on our own fortunes that we begin to participate in a kind of violence, even against our loved ones, even against our family members? So all to say, like, I think finding a way to ask the question more robustly in an ending, or to strike some note that kind of gathers the themes of the story without necessarily feeling you have to supply an answer to impossible questions. One of my favorite stories is by George Saunders, and it's about a zombie ant who comes back from the dead, and the whole story is hilarious and sad, and at the end, it's like, wow, it seems like a lot of the questions were resolved. They were in financial peril, and now the dad has a new job. The zombie ant who came back from the dead is gone again, so she's not, breaking the door off the microwave and threatening everyone. But there's this final paragraph, and in the paragraph, the ant comes back in a dream, and she just keeps asking, why do some people get everything in this life and some people get nothing? And that's the question. If you didn't have that there, I think it would be a lesser story, and it would just be a funny story. And it becomes something lasting because it's open in that way. Yeah. Anyway, that's a long answer. Sorry, Alex. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Miles, and this is somewhat of an evil question to ask, but I've asked it to every Symposium author that I've seen at KO. And so, if all of your stories were drowning in a lake, and you were on a boat, and you could only save one story, God. What story would you save?
This
and
is
why?
like some Peter Singer utilitarian thought experiment. This is hard. If all of my stories were drowning in a lake, which story would I save? Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I mean, I guess Reeling for the Empire. I think that is the story I would save. And I can't even tell you why. That was just when you gave me this terrible thought experiment. That's the one that, and it's like the one that people will be reading, I guess, presumably, hopefully, maybe that story.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So my class read Sleep Donation, and I just wanted to ask a little bit about the end of it.
Yeah.
Like the end of it
so
happens
open.
where Trish calls the hotline a bunch of times. She tells about what Jim is doing with baby asleep. But I was wondering the ending doesn't talk about the actual insomniac crisis itself, and it's still ongoing at the end. So maybe if you were to write a sequel, how would the insomniac crisis end or continue after that?
That's such a great question, and thank you so much for spending time in that kind of twilight zone. I sort of made this deliberate decision to end the novella at this moment where, in my best hope for it was that you would feel this pendulum swinging, sort of connecting like a utopian wish and a very dystopian kind of reality or possibility. Like you could feel both possibilities. And interestingly, this book has been optioned by the guy who made Station 11. Did any of you guys see that show? And we were just discussing the ending, and I gave him what I thought was like a beautiful monologue about all of the ethical implications of this person who is trying to make a decision that isn't, right? It's sort of a rebuke of consequentialism. Like, actually, she has no idea what this choice will mean, and she's just acting because it's her sense that it's the virtuous thing or it's the morally correct thing in a real void. And it may be totally wrong, right? Like, it may be right that these kinds of utilitarian calculations that this other organization is making lead to some better world, or we'll find the cure. And I think for me, it felt impossible to write an ending that sort of spoke to the outcome. Like, what was so interesting for me was just thinking, like, if you are operating in a vacuum like that, if you really don't know what the outcome will be, and you're just guided by your own sense of what the right thing to do is, even in this sort of goofy thought experiment where the stakes are truly apocalyptic, you know, what is that feeling, right? And I sort of could imagine it going either way. I guess that's what I mean about an open ending. I can easily imagine, like, this whistleblower being punished and scapegoated, you know, great wealth being generated as sleep becomes a commodity, many people dying of the insomnia crisis, but other people now having access to sort of life-saving medicine, essentially. So a world that's not so remote from the one that we live in, if you extrapolate from trend lines of today. But I can imagine, too, like somebody like Trish, the protagonist of this novella, finding people on the margins and sort of people in a night world and sort of dreaming up a kind of world that we all want to live in that's more equitable. So I could see both. When I told the filmmaker about this, he was like, ambiguity doesn't film well. He was like, maybe she could, like, kidnap the baby. And I was like, I mean, so maybe the sequel will just be on screen, and it will be this poor woman kidnapping a baby. I don't know, guys. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
My name's Arthur, and I read Swamplandia, and I was just thinking, because we got so much insight into Ava and Kiwi's story, but I thought there was so much potential in Ava's, so I was wondering why you chose to focus on 2 of the 3 Big Tree children.
Thank you, I love that question. My siblings would want you to know that they're all parts of my own, like, psyche. My siblings are always like, my brother's like, why did you make the brother that, you know, red-haired nerd? And I was like, it's just fiction, brother. Which is always fraught. You guys will discover this when your own family members read your stories. You know, there can be a kind of a paranoid reading. I thought it would originally just be Ava's story. And that story is sort of, it's fiction, right? But and none of it is one-to-one autobiography. But I think some of it is very personal, right? Or it has its roots sunk in some painful parts of our own family history. So at a certain point, it's a novel about a family of alligator wrestlers, all of whom sort of go to their own different underworlds. And Ava's is like a genuinely nightmarish one. And I think I felt so stuck. I felt sort of overwhelmed by, like, the sadness and the darkness of it in a way. And at that point, I was like, there's gonna be another underworld, one we all recognize, a Disney-like nightmarish theme park retail underworld, the world of darkness. And I think that opened up another pole. It was like a new place on the map. So this is a long answer, but just to say, if you guys find yourself getting stuck, I heard my friend Morgan Talty, a brilliant writer, say that he's like, yeah, when I get stuck, I just hit somebody with a turkey. I was like, this is amazing craft advice. You know, if you're really like, you've really written yourself into a corner and you're not enjoying yourself anymore, it doesn't have to be a turkey, okay? But, like, do something, make yourself laugh, find some other kind of, you can travel, right? You can make some lateral move to another part of your story world, which I think is what I wanted to do. I think I needed somewhere else to exist in relation to this swamp that was becoming increasingly kind of hallucinatory and frightening. And I will say, too, I used to talk about the Kansas-Oz ratio. Do you guys know The Wizard of Oz? I think for me also, it was like a way, Oz always exists in relation to Kansas, right? So having the mainland, I think it just authenticated this fantasy world, too.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Hi, I'm Maya, and our class read Orange World, and I was just wondering what inspired you to write it, because it's a little odd. So I was just wondering, like, where you got those ideas from.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. I mean, I once read Orange World at a high school, and I remember just feeling like there's something carnal and estranging about becoming a parent. And I think that, it is an odd story, but I just have to tell you, pregnancy is a very odd experience, and childbirth as well. Like, I think if I had just written like a personal essay for a magazine about becoming a new mother, it could never have told the truth about the wildness of that experience, you know? And I still think the arithmetic is very strange, where like you have two people, it's like 1 + 1 = 3 is like a weird equation, okay? It's very odd. I think too, so this is a story about a new mother who makes a deal with the devil to save her child's life. And she says she will like breastfeed or nurse the devil to keep her child alive. I love the Brothers Grimm. I really did love fairy tale. And I don't know if you guys have read these recently. The devil always shows up like, it's like the art of the deal. Like the devil is not coming when things are good. The devil's coming where you're like a veteran who's returned from war and you have nothing and your life is in shambles. And then the devil's like, what's up? If you give me your soul, I will solve this economic problem for you. So I think, this is a long-winded answer too, but I needed that register. I needed there to be something mythic or something otherworldly to get at what I sort of learned. I had some difficult times in my pregnancy. I really thought I was gonna lose my son, and then there was like a terrifying diagnosis. So that's the bedrock of truth that it's built out of, is that I really, and I know you guys all know this, even if you don't have children, that feeling where like, regular lighting becomes emergency lighting, and like suddenly you would do anything, right, to keep somebody safe, like anything. Like all of your other anxieties feel like luxury anxieties that you're nostalgic for, and you would genuinely do anything to help that person who is in trouble, who got a bad diagnosis, when that emergency lighting shifts you into like a real red world. And so I wanted to write about this enormous love, but also the shadow of fear, right, that the love kind of casts on the water. And I just needed like a different register to do that in. I wouldn't have known how to write about that transformation in like a realist vein. But some of you will find out later in life when you become parents. You'll be like, that lady was right. This story is the truth.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Thank you guys so much. What a pleasure, and I hope I'll keep chatting. Thanks.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much. You are dismissed. And those of you who are going to alumni for lunch, you can head over there now.